Hello, welcome to the slideshow on speculative essays. These essays either argue causes or argue effects. The first slide I have here simply says that one of the things you do, especially when you're arguing causes, is to establish the existence. Then from there, you're going to look at plausible causes, or if you're going the other direction, plausible effects, and try to show why the ones that you support make the most sense, and while the others make less sense. This could be events, this could be conditions, this could be behaviors that you're looking at. I'm starting this slide by just looking at a trend. So how do we define the trend? Well, it has to be longer than a fad. You're going to be able to establish this statistically. So we can look at the rise in single parent homes. I don't know, go back to 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, up into the 21st century. And you're going to see that certainly there was a rise and perhaps it leveled off, but we certainly have more of it than we did in the past. Then you'd want to start asking yourself why, do some research, most likely to find reasons why, and try to look why some make more sense, some make less sense, how some are interrelated, so forth and so on. Decline in standardized test scores, we can look back in the past and see where America was higher on the list as it, you can establish that it kind of declined over time, and then from there try to look at reasons. Why has it declined over time? And part of it could be that we're not looking at the exact same thing when we compare ourselves to other countries. Most other countries, when they take those basic skills tests, those tests determine which type of school they're going to, which type of classes they're taking, whether they're college bound or not. In America, you're looking at everyone being all together. So you might not be looking at the same thing, but you could do some research and figure out if that's the case. You could also look at one-time events, why we entered the Iraq War or something like that. You could look at something notable about the human condition. Why do people procrastinate, for example? All right, so this next slide is just going to look at the topic of climate change and hypothetically kind of show you how you might set up a paper. So establishing the trend with evidence, there is plenty of evidence to show that climate change exists. 6.7 inches in the sea level increase, for example, since the year 2000. We also have 15 of the 16th warmest years since 2001. So establishing the evidence is fine. For this particular scenario, we're looking at the effects. What are some of the effects? Warming oceans, shrinking ice sheets, so forth and so on that you see there. So you would start looking at the various effects and do research on each area, a paragraph or two on each, some more, some less, for example, to try to argue the possible effects of climate change. You might also look at the causes and then try to show why some are more likely than others. And this is where you get into is the human element a factor? Well, roughly 97% of all climate scientists say, yes, humans are a factor, but you can find that out through research. All right, the next couple of slides, 2-3 slides we're going to look at anyhow, are just going to show the difference between arguing causes versus arguing effects. What I'm trying to show you here is that it's a different paper. Some students want to argue both causes and effects, and I'm not saying that can never happen, but generally speaking, it's a lot easier to choose one or the other. And what I'm going to try to show you is it's generally a different paper if you're doing one or the other. So why are we a fast food society? If you're looking at this, you're probably going to be arguing effects, the health issues and so forth. Most of that's probably going to fall more into an informative type paper and might not work as well for an argumentative paper, though as through research you might find things you could argue. But it's a different paper than arguing the causes. Why have we become so prone to fast food in this culture? And I think, time has to be a big one. We're constantly busy. We're constantly on the run. So being a busy society, it just lends itself more easily to fast food. We also have more single-family homes than we had in the past. And those single-family homes have one parent who's probably pretty darn busy. And so it would make sense that, hey, we're going to go pick up some fast food tonight rather than slave over a stove, so to speak, in those situations. Also, because our incomes have not kept up with inflation over the years, most middle class families have to have both parents working if they're going to be able to afford the mortgage and the car payments and the groceries and heating bills and AC bills and so forth and so on. So because we have both parents working, kind of like that last one, yeah, we're going to have people that are tired and people that probably are going to, be more likely to say, hey, let's just go get some fast food. We don't have just one person at home who could be preparing meals all day as much so anymore. Um, the death of the traditional family, I think, is a stretch, though I think I did read an article that mentioned, tradition has died. But we've changed. Because we're all busy, because we're working different schedules, we don't necessarily have everybody even home at the same time to enjoy a meal. As a matter of fact, you might pick up your kids, take them to dance class, soccer, whatever, and then in between, get a bite to eat and then go to the other events. So maybe it was soccer first and then dance and so forth. Maybe dad's still at work while this is going on, or mom's still at work while this is going on. It kind of goes back to that we're busy thing, but we're changing. We don't necessarily have those traditional meals as often. Maybe one day a week where we know everybody's together, we have that traditional meal, but it isn't necessarily a daily thing like it used to. And there's always the convenience, the fact that it's more cost effective, it's familiar, so forth and so on. The main thing I'm trying to show you here is that it's a different paper than that top one. The top one is looking at the effects of eating fast food. It's not good for you. And the other one's looking at why we're more prone to eat fast food. Freudian slip there. Yeah, it might make you fat. So, divorce. This is a great topic which would work either way for causes or effects. If you want to argue the causes of divorce, that's a great paper. You're going to start out with equality and the feminist movement, certainly. And the reason I would say that is because it was pretty taboo in the past. And if anyone was going to initiate a divorce, it would have to be the man, because for a good portion of the time, the woman was essentially the property of her husband. She didn't have the right to vote. Suffrage didn't happen until later. And until those steps were made and women started to gain some of the equal rights of men, of course there wasn't much divorce because men could be, well, quite awful and not have to worry about getting a divorce. So certainly a stride for equality and the feminist movement play a big role into why you would have more divorce, because women don't have to put up with nonsense that they had to put up with in the past. Our views of religion and marriage, or looking at marriage more in a secular light or as a civil agreement, and when you sign that contract, maybe I want out of the contract because things aren't going so well, I'm going to get out of the contract. They don't just see it as only the religious ceremony, which means you're joined forever, period. So I think definitely there is some of that. Capitalism might play a role in the idea that we all want this, perfect mate. We live in this consumer culture where, I can buy some tennis shoes. A few months later, if I don't like them, I buy new tennis shoes, so forth and so on. So the idea there is, subconsciously at least, this consumer society, or disposable society, if you will, because obsolescence is kind of built into everything. Your iPhone is good for a couple of years, but then it becomes obsolete and you need a new one. Well, some argue that perhaps that carries over to our relationships. And the usual suspects: stress. Why are we stressed out? Money, we fight over money. Time, whether we had less time together, more time together, however that works out in the scenario. Computers, online dating, obsessive surfing, all that kind of stuff. And of course, adultery would be a reason. So that would work as a great paper, exploring all those causes, looking how they're interrelated, looking how some are more likely than others. The effects, usually it goes into that hurts the kids or it helps the kids. So here's the hurts the kids standpoint. In the hurts the kids standpoint, they're going to look at the rates of teen crime, alcohol and other drug use, violence, test scores, so forth and so on. And they're going to say children of divorce tend to have more negative consequences, if you will. On the other hand, there's going to be the branch of people that say it actually is better for the kids. They might initially kind of concede, but then accommodate that, yeah, it hurts originally, initially while you're going through the growing pains, but once they adjust and they adapt, they get their grades back up, and many of them actually turn out better for being removed from that situation. Because let's not forget, when divorce is imminent, the house is probably not a very pleasant place to be. And many psychologists would say it's much better to get the child out of that situation rather than to leave the child in that situation. So they're going to say it helps kids. Also, more autonomy. They're going to become more autonomous because they have more time alone. The oldest child of the divorce, in particular, which is kind of similar to any situation for the oldest child, but in particular with the divorce, if they're home alone with the younger siblings quite a bit, they take on a lot of the responsibilities, and therefore it actually is better for them as they transition into adults. In any case, it's going to change the definition of family. What you consider as a family is no longer mom, dad, and 2.2 kids, or however the statistics fall out. It could be mom and just the kids, dad and just the kids. It could be mom and stepdad and stepbrother and stepsister. The way we define family has changed because of the amount of divorce we have. And I'm just saying it could also tie into that last slide about fast food. So the main thing is with these slides, what I'm trying to show you is it's a different paper. Arguing causes versus arguing effects is not the same thing. Belief in God, I brought this one up because of the scientist that came up with the God gene as he was studying DNA and so forth. He figures that he found the string of DNA that makes the difference. People that have a weak string of this DNA are much more likely to be agnostic, atheist, skeptical, so forth and so on, whereas people that have a strong string are much more likely to be people of faith. So he was trying to, lay the foundation that there's actually a genetic reason for why some people have faith and others are much more skeptical. From this, of course, other scientists stepped in and talked about evolution, how we became the mammals that evolved to the point where we understood our own mortality. Once we understood our own mortality, of course, we were going to come up with stories to make sense of that mortality in each culture. Though the archetypes have a lot of similarities across the board, each culture has a different story, perhaps, as to what happens to us when we die, all of that. Also, many will look at the environment, society, civilizations. Most civilizations that have had, hierarchies and so forth, the rulers certainly like the idea of using some sort of religious foundation because that kept people in line, and so forth. So a lot of times people look at it as a way for the kings and the pharaohs and so forth and so on to have kept people in line. There is also, of course, all the psychological things that it offers. It offers purpose. It's a way of explaining things that we can otherwise not explain. And of course, innate knowledge goes back to Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher, who essentially said some things we're born with. We're born with a conscience, a sense of immortality, so forth and so on. Or you might say we're born with a soul. So that is a paper that could argue the causes of why people believe in a higher power. If you want to look at the effects, much like the divorce one, you have the two camps. It's positive or it's negative. The people that look at the positive effects of a belief in higher power are going to look at all the, the wonderful things throughout, history that civilizations and cultures have offered us, like perhaps the day of the week. If you're looking, at Tuesday, that goes back to Tayu, which would be going back to the god of war. So Mars, or if you want to go all the way back, Aries. But all these things have been established because of a belief in deities back in the day. And you can do the same for Thor. We have the Norse versions, but Thor, would go back to, the Jupiter or Zeus stories, if you will. So, there's positive things. There's morality in general. Most of these religions, all of the religions that stem from the Judeo-Christian and Islamic belief system do have the idea that we surrender to a power greater than us. Altruism is weaved into most of these as well. Now, the people that follow don't always practice it, but altruism is certainly a foundation in Christianity. It's certainly a foundation in Buddhism, where you are selfless. You, in order to reach some sort of level of happiness, you have to let go of your own ego and essentially give to others, be kind, be empathetic, be compassionate. All these things are weaved into most of our major spiritual belief systems, whether they be Eastern or Western. Community involvement and so forth and so on, you see there as well. Now, the main thing is that I'm trying to show you is that this is a different paper than arguing the negative sides or the other sides of it. So you could also bring in the negative here: war, terrorism, discrimination against outsiders, discrimination against gays, distortion of worldview, distortion of logic, kind of pretending science doesn't exist. Though even the Catholic Church has acknowledged evolution exists, and the Earth has been here billions of years, the universe was given billions more, but that doesn't mean that you can't still have faith in a power greater than ourselves. So back on track, you could bring in both the positive and negative effects and put together that paper. But that is a different paper than that first paper, which is arguing the causes or the reasons why we believe in God. So looking at the effects versus looking at the causes is generally going to be a different paper. That's all I'm really trying to show in these slides. All right, some of the strategies. Make sure it's not ambiguous. Make sure the audience understands your subject. Establish, the reason for the paper. Maybe establish the trend itself if you're doing that, so forth and so on. So go beyond what is understood and try to dig a little bit deeper. And you might have to use some expository strategies first to help the audience understand what the topic is all about. And then it's really establishing that existence and so forth. When you get into the cause or effect part of this, you might rank it, you might make stipulations, you might show how some are interrelated, so forth and so on. So you generally are going to dismiss some of the more obvious ones and try to go beyond those. So if you're looking at, there's an essay out there, What Makes a Serial Killer? And she brings in a lot of environmental things. They watch too much violence, they come from abusive families, so forth and so on. The problem with that is that those are post hoc arguments. We all watch a lot of violence. We don't end up, using an axe to murder our families. We all, not all, but many people, I should say, have been through abusive situations. They might learn that abusive behavior and carry it on, unfortunately, into their life, but they don't just become serial killers. So if you're really looking at what makes a serial killer, as she does in that essay, you might first go to the more genetic makeup, the more the way that it's wired in their brain, and then bring in those environmental ones to supplement it. So in any case, as you are looking at your argument, it kind of depends upon your research, what you find, and then you can kind of decide how you're going to piece it together. But you will be looking at making a cause or effect argument, trying to show why some causes make more sense than others, or why some effects make more sense than others, or perhaps, in many cases, how they're interrelated. Counter-arguing is important in all argumentative writing. You must make sure that you try to refute, if possible, or at very least accommodate. As I mentioned, for refutation in causal arguments, you just point out it's post hoc ergo propter hoc. That is, just because the first thing happened doesn't mean it has to have caused the second thing. It could be coincidental. There could be other more complex reasons at heart, so forth and so on. Accommodation is kind of say, okay, I get where you're coming from, and I admit there is something to it. However, it also needs this. And then you bring in your reasons to back it up. So do make sure you counter-argue at least a little bit in your argumentative paper. That's true with all argumentative writing. The topics I'll let you look at on your own on that other slide, but I do have some topics that are pretty popular out there for you to consider, though I think for the most part, I have other things in mind for you through the textbook. So these are on that other slide if you want to look at them as far as, low voter turnout, for example. You could tie that into your Moore paper. Why is it that we don't have people turn out to vote in this country, and then try to go through the reasons, so forth and so on. That concludes the PowerPoint on speculative essays, arguing causes, or arguing effects. I look forward to reading your papers.